Hello, my dear unknown friends. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ignotus Amicus. I hope everyone is doing well this evening. Hope everyone is staying warm. Those of us here, especially in North America. Thankfully, where I am at, we did not get hit too terribly by the storm. And most of what we got was maybe about 4 inches of snow and then about an inch of frozen rain pellets. Large enough to see quite visibly, but not quite to where it would be big enough to be hail, but it was pretty close. It was really fascinating to see. Let's see. Well, since, let's see. Dave Tsunami says, in Pittsburgh, we got around 15 inches. I can believe it. I'm originally from Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is about, well, nowadays it's about an hour and 40 minutes. But back in the 90s and early 2000s, I think it took at least 2 hours and 10 minutes to get to Pittsburgh. It was back before they had, or it was back when they were doing a lot of road construction along Old Route 22. So, but yeah, I can believe it. I think some of my cousins and great uncles and aunts still live in the Pittsburgh area. It's been a few years since I've been able to get up to the family reunion, and hopefully this year I'll be able to make that happen so that I can introduce my wife to the rest of the family. Dave Tsunami, if you don't mind me asking, since you're in Pittsburgh, which parish there do you attend Mass at? If you don't mind answering, I know that there's a lot of parishes there, both Roman Catholic and Byzantine Catholic, as well as a lot of Orthodox churches there as well. There was a time in the late 90s and the early 2000s where my family, and I think I relayed this on one of my streams a few weeks ago. We used to go up to St. Boniface, just outside West Side, I think it's either west side or northwest side of Pittsburgh. And I forget the name of the chaplain there. He had gotten interviewed by Mother Angelica on her show, and it was shortly after that. That then Archbishop Whirl, now Cardinal Whirl, decided to take an axe to the Latin Mass at the diocesan level in Pittsburgh. And as young as I was, I can't say that I necessarily recall or understand everything that Father had said in that interview. But I'll have to see if I can find it. See if I can find that episode, and then I will maybe I'll have a better idea. Most precious blood. Oh, very nice, very nice. Well, I'm very thrilled that you have a place that you can attend Latin Mass. It's more than just a treasure. It's more than just good liturgy. It is, subject for another video, and probably subject best addressed by others who are a bit more learned on the subject of the history and theology behind liturgy than myself currently. Perhaps someday I hope to have an even deeper understanding than my rudimentary layman's. See, I think the Institute of Christ the King moved from Saint Boniface to most holy to most precious blood. Oh, okay. I don't know if it was Institute of Christ the King that was there when I was attending, when my family was attending at St. Boniface. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was diocesan through Ecclesia Dei, which is why it was so easy to take the axe to it on the part of then Archbishop Whirl. So, let's see, we're new to the area though. Canon Avis is the pastor. Okay. Lovely. I have seen the vestments, the aesthetics of Institute of Christ the King, Sovereign Priest, are impressive and incredibly French, and I don't see anything wrong with that. So, all right, wonderful. Well, for everybody who's watching currently, and for those watching on the VOD, I have my latest, my inaugural essay for 2026 up on my Substack. I should have the link down in the description of this live stream. And unfortunately, it was not the essay that I had planned. Not necessarily where I had planned, the essay that I had planned to publish. I'm still working on the one I initially set out to release, but it still needs a little bit of work, still needs a little more prayer, and eventually it'll come out, probably in bits and pieces. I might have to split it up, but the one that I have up now came about rather, I don't know if providentially is the right way to say it, but it is certainly born of an experience of something familiar to me, and the experience that I had was very different from the times from other times that I've viewed and experienced the media in question. So for anyone who may not know, the month of January, specifically January 3rd, is the birth of J.R.R. Tolkien, and at the Alamo Drafthouse Cinema, they were having every year they have special screenings, but this year in particular is a special year because it is the 25th anniversary of the Fellowship of the Ring. And so next year it'll be the 25th anniversary of the Two Towers, and then the successive year of Return of the King. And what was different about my visit this time was that my wife was with me. Being a newly married man and working as best as I can at trying to start and grow my family, I had a response. I had this almost, for lack of a better description, almost like a spiritual response to seeing something for the 100th time, something I'm familiar with, something that I could probably recite every line of dialogue for, forwards and backwards, for all three movies. They were an incredibly important part of my childhood. They came out right as I was entering adolescence and helped to form me into the bookworm that I am, for starters, as well as personal aspirations for something, for things creative, things sub-creative, as Tolkien would say on fairy tales, or on fairy stories, sorry. So the essay on the Sophurgist over at Substack is just a personal essay, sort of retelling the experience. And I hope that you all will take a chance and some time to give it a read. And if you enjoy it, please make sure to like and share it. And if you haven't yet, and if you want to see the big one that I'm working on for Substack, be sure to subscribe to the Sophurgist over there. My plan for this year is to start to add and provide more content to that platform. I find that it's a far more sustainable and far more productive. Productive? No. Oh, what's the good word? It's a far friendlier atmosphere over at Substack. People seem to take the time to care about what it is that they're commenting on and how they respond, especially, which is something that you don't see on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And you certainly don't see it on Facebook. I'm probably going to be pulling back from Facebook for a while, if not indefinitely. I will still post links to the live streams, the VODs, and to my essays on Substack on Facebook, even less so on X. But my hope is to make Substack a home for more written content and more thoughtful pieces. Let's see. Before we get into the subject for tonight, just want to address the most recent comment in chat from Jacobite Wiseman, asking, where would I find a good human training dojo in the Midwest? Well, for that, my suggestion would be, there should be a website. I'll see if I can find it. Let's see. I know of a. Yeah, so if you go to HemaAlliance.com, let me copy this. I'll put it in chat for everybody who's interested. Try to anyway. So if you go to this link I just posted, it has a club finder. One caveat I will give for the club finder is mainly there might be some that are still listed that are actually defunct. In Virginia, in the area that I live, or where I was living before now, there were two. One that is still active in Charlottesville, and the other was somewhere north of where the SSPX seminary is, in a place called Schuyler. Now, the Schuyler Club, I had sent an email. Sadly, they never got back to me. I don't know if they exist. From discussions I've had with the Charlottesville group, they believe that Schuyler, Virginia group is defunct. So there might be a few listed on that map that may not be active anymore, but you can always shoot them an email or find their Facebook group. Some of them might even run a Discord chat. Another place that you can look, if you have Discord, there is an official global HEMA, like a general HEMA Discord server. With that, just give them a little bit of grace. They do aesthetically and visually make appeals to the rainbow fascist crowd, or the alphabet soup crowd. And despite that, it is still a good place to get the basic information that you need to know about where to find, like if you need recommendations for where to find a club, where to go to find gear online and elsewhere. It's a good, not to mention they also have some channels where they pin useful resources, PDFs of manuscripts and transcriptions of manuscripts of all the different fecht books, or fighting books as they're called. So those would be my suggestions if you're interested in HEMA, you want to get started and you're looking for a club. Go to that HEMA Alliance page, and then check out the Global HEMA Discord server to get a little bit more information. Again, just bear them a little grace, despite given their visual and obvious political leanings on the part of the moderators. You know, you win some, you lose some, I guess. All right. So we'll go ahead and touch on the subject of tonight's live stream without further ado, I guess. And so if you read the title of the video, Age of the Second, Rule of the Third, algorithms, egregores, and it cuts off. I can't read the rest of it there. Anyhow, but yeah, Age of the Second, Rule of the Third. What is this a reference to? For those of you who have been following for a while, there's the title is referencing letter 3 of Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot, where he meditates on the imagery contained on the Empress card. And it's within the first paragraph or two where he gives a he categorizes magic. As I have argued in videos and in other live streams, I believe that in this opening of the letter, Tomberg is riffing off of Aleister Crowley's definition of magic, seeing that it was, which would make sense because it's the, at the time that Meditations was being written, would have been around the time that Crowley's occultism was seeing sort of a boom. The world was seeing a surge of interest in the Golden Dawn and similar ceremonial magical practices alongside Wicca. Thelema was really big, and even today we still have the Ordo Templi Orientis and other offshoots of Crowley's adventures that he began and either left, abandoned, or started offshoots of elsewhere in the world. And for those of you who may not know, Aleister Crowley's definition of magic is that magic is the art and science of causing change in accordance with will. He capitalizes will as a proper noun, and tries to explain throughout his work the magic and theory and practice that the will that he has in mind is something he refers to as the true will, which just kind of borrows a lot of that sort of Blavatskyan. You have your true self. There's your true self and your false self. Very, 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 very Gnostic, like big G Gnostic tendencies. Very Manichaean tendencies of thought. Yes, dark forces indeed. Jacobite, very dark forces. But in this opening page of letter 3, what does Tomberg do? He does something that's very similar to what we see in, what's it called? The Arbitel, which is an anonymously composed manuscript detailing something being described as the magic of the ancients, but all that survives of it, or all that we have, and possibly all that was ever really written, was the isagogy, or the introduction to what was supposed to end up being this larger project. Again, either that never ended up existing, or that never ended up getting written, or we just simply have lost it, or it might be sitting in some dusty old warehouse at a university waiting to be cataloged by an intern or something. Who knows? But anyhow, in Arbitel, at the end, there is an attempt to categorize magic into here. I'll just I'll grab it so that I don't tell you wrong. So it's right at the end in the final aphorism 49 of the seventh part of the isagogy. Let's see. So he's just he delineates to this author, sorry, Arbitel, the anonymous author. He has two categorizations, good and evil, and then he branches them off. Now, the way that he has it written here is as scientiae, or science. That there's good science and bad science, and then within those categories or subcategories that he refers to as, for good, there's theosophy and anthroposophy given to man, meaning that it's it's a way to refer to that the anthroposophy is given to man by God. The author, it's assumed, given many of the passages in it, is supposedly Christian. They're not sure exactly if he was Lutheran or Calvinist, because there is mention of there is the word predestination, but there's no knowing whether the predestination that the author is speaking of is of the Calvinist ilk, or of a more traditional understanding of predestination. Then under evil science, there's kakosophy and kakodemony. And then he branches them out a little bit more. So under theosophy, the author of the Arbitel describes it as that it's the knowledge of the Word of God and arranging one's life according to the Word of God. And it also comprises of the knowledge of the government of God through the angels, which Scripture calls watchmen, and understanding the mysteries of the angels. Under anthroposophy, as given to man, he describes it briefly here as the knowledge of natural things and the wisdom in human affairs. So those two things, theosophy and anthroposophy, under this schema are good, are boni scientiae. Under evil, under mali scientiae, he has, so there's cacosophy, which he briefly describes in this gloss as contempt for the word of God and living according to the will of the devil, ignorance of the government of God through the angels, to scorn the protection of the angels and associating with devils, and includes idolatry and atheism. Then in kakodemoni, he glosses it as being the knowledge of poisons in nature and to use them, wisdom in all evil arts to the destruction of mankind, and to use them in contempt of God and for the loss and destruction of people. So let me grab my paperback of meditations. So if we go to letter 3, go to the beginning of letter 3. Let me make sure. Okay. This is the Traker Penguin edition. This was my the first edition that I had. It's got all my highlights. So letter 3, first page of letter 3, Tomberg gives us the third arcanum, the Empress, is that of sacred magic. Then he says, now there are three kinds of magic. Magic where the magician is the instrument of divine power. This is sacred magic. Magic where the magician himself is the source of the magical operation. This is personal magic. And lastly, magic where the magician is the instrument of elemental forces or other unconscious forces. This is sorcery. All magic, including sorcery, is putting into practice this, that the subtle rules the dense, force rules matter, consciousness rules force, and the superconsciousness or divine rules consciousness. It is this latter rulership that the Empress symbolizes. So you can see if in that passage there, in that passage there, we see sort of how Tomberg is riffing off of Crowley, while at the same time we see something similar happening here that we see happening in the Arbitel. And so I'm going to, if you permit me, I'm going to also riff off of Tomberg a little bit by drawing a comparison between what Tomberg is describing and what the author of the Arbitel is describing. I would argue that Tomberg and the Arbitel, as far as the categorization of magic is concerned, are somewhat in agreement. Specifically, my argument would be that the boni scientiae of the Arbitel, being the theosophy and anthroposophy, that is, well, the theosophy portion of it, that is comparable to Tomberg's sacred magic. And why do I say this? Because of how the Arbitel describes good magic, good science, that it's the knowledge of the Word of God, which is Jesus Christ, and arranging one's life according to the Word of God. Tomberg would describe, in fits and starts all throughout Meditations on the Tarot, he talks about the practice he sort of draws upon his knowledge of certain practices that he's familiar with, shows where it's congruent with John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, and then proposes what he calls concentration without effort. I will throw a link in the description later for the VOD, where you can go. There's a channel called, it used to be called Metalore. It's also known as Greenwood Media. It's Scott Mannion. He's Eastern Orthodox, and he is very, very well studied in Tomberg, specifically as it relates to this concentration without effort, what that practice is, and how one actually goes about practicing it. He's taken all of the mentions of it throughout Meditations on the Tarot, and he's distilled it into the steps you take and descriptions of the phenomenology that commonly occur when one does practice it. I myself have experienced some of these things, but I will not go into detail about them here. Now, for the Arbitel, anthroposophy is the knowledge of the natural things and wisdom in human affairs. This particular category of the good sciences is, it may initially not seem to fit neatly into Tomberg's schema. However, later on in the third letter and elsewhere in Meditations on the Tarot, Tomberg does say, something to the effect of that personal magic, the second category, it can, or there is the potential for good to come of it, but it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line because it relies too much upon man and upon man alone, and very rarely ever seeks that assistance from divinity. So I would say this anthroposophy, as the Arbitel has it, that would be closest to the second category of personal magic, even though it's listed in the Arbitel as a good science. Just because it's limited to the knowledge of natural things, which, you know, has actually led to where we are today, which we'll get into that. So moving on, under the evil sciences of the Arbitel as listed here, you have cacosophy, contempt for the word of God and living according to the will of the devil, ignorance of the government of God through the angels, the scorn, the act or the practice of scorning the protection of the angels and associating with the devils, idolatry, and atheism. The way that it's rendered on the page here, you have it right here, the sort of glosses of what cacosophy is versus what anthroposophy is. I think it's no accident that these two geographically on the page are near each other, because I think it's this middle section here that we could say might fit the second category of Tomberg's schema, that both anthroposophy and cacosophy occupy the space of personal magic, because these two things here relate to one's personal knowledge and understanding of nature, and of wisdom, and of the things of human affairs. It's a more personal, a more individualistic concern compared to theosophy, as described here. So I should probably clear up real quick. when I say theosophy here in this stream, I am not referring to Blavatskyan mysticism. I'm not talking about Blavatsky or Dion Fortune or Alice Bailey. Okay, I'm strictly following as it's written here in the Arbitel. So just put aside any preconceived notions about theosophy as it relates to Bailey and Blavatsky. It's not pertinent for this stream. I just want to make sure I have that caveat out there. So then, under the evil sciences, kakodaimony, which is knowledge of poisons and the use of them, and wisdom in all evil arts, to the destruction of mankind, and to use them in contempt of God, and for the loss and destruction of people. One thing that is interesting within this comparison of the Arbitel's categories and Tomberg's is this third category. Tomberg refers to it as sorcery. The Arbitel here is referring to it as kakodaimony. And there seems to be a different emphasis in Tomberg than there is here. So I'm not sure exactly how well they fit, how well they jive, how well they're congruent with each other. They certainly don't seem to be conjunct in any way, just based upon the wording. With that being said, even in Tomberg's descriptions of what sorcery is, even though he is speaking in terms of sorcery being the will to act out, well, the acting out as an instrument of forces you do not know of, that are unconscious and that you do not understand, which could be argued is what most of the 19th century occult revival ceremonial magic is. Many of the medieval manuscripts of magic certainly fall into that category as well. A classic example would be the Ars Notoria, also known as the notary art, which Thomas Aquinas actually pays direct mention to in his, I think he mentions it in Summa Contra Gentiles. And there might be an even subtler reference to the Ars Notoria's existence in the Summa Theologica. And why use this as an example? Well, we have these drawings with these figures. There's this pseudopigraphia within the manuscript pages within the diagrams and the illuminations that one is supposed to sort of look at in a sort of trance-like state, in a state of concentration without effort, one could say. And that there are various barbarous words that one should recite before and after. There's a whole method to the Ars Notoria that's listed out in many of the translations of it. This is not an endorsement to attempt it. It could be argued that it would be better to avoid looking at the actual manuscript pages, if at all possible. And if for whatever reason, if you need to view it in an academic light in order to conduct some form of research, I would just stick to transcriptions of the manuscripts that do not include the pages with the notae themselves, just for your safety. There was an attempt made by a monk in the 13th century, I believe, John of Morigny. I don't know for sure if Claire Fanger, who has written the sort of a history of John of Morigny, and who also prepared a transcription of the Latin manuscript into legible print. I don't know if she is working on a full translation of the work, and this is going to come sort of back. This is going to come back up a little later on, possibly when we get a little bit more into the thick of our subject for today. So all of this is just to kind of give us all a gauge with which to assess the subject of today's live stream. What is that? Again, the title of the video is what age of the second, rule of the third. We're talking about the second and third categories of magic as laid out by Tomberg in Meditations on the Tarot. The second category being personal magic. The third being sorcery. The subtitle is algorithms, egregores, and the bronze talking heads. So there's a fairly common, I don't know how common, but there's a type of story that is relayed here and there throughout the medieval period, both in Europe and in the early Islamic caliphates, even before the rise of Islam. There are stories of men of science, of men of astrologers, astronomers, men of great wisdom, who construct these talismanic bronze busts, these bronze heads. And the reason for creating them is to create something that is animated. It has some similarities to theurgic practices found in early and late antiquity, in the Hellenistic era, of the animating of statues, where they carve the statue, and then there's this ritual to imbue the presence of the entity into the statue. There's evidence of this practice in Egypt and later in Greece. I don't recall if there is any instance of it in the Roman period within their religion, but generally across the board, it was a very common practice, a very common ritualistic observance, that a form of theurgy, a form of pagan theurgy, polytheistic theurgy, where you imbued the idol with an animating principle through the rites, that the result of which would be the indwelling of that entity within the idol. And it's why we call it idolatry. It's why it's a practice that is contrary to the Christian faith. With that being said, we can see through natural through the natural reason possessed by the pagans, that it's like somehow deep inside the Adamic part of the brain. We're going to start using that instead of the fishy part of the brain, because our ancestors are not fish. Our ancestors are Adam and Eve. So in the Adamic part of the brain, there's some form of knowledge that's still present through the generations during this period of history, this ancient period of history, where it's almost like it's like a prefigurement. It's a pagan prefigurement of the Eucharist. This concept that a powerful entity would be contained within a visible sign. Now, of course, the pagans, they had it wrong. They applied that knowledge incorrectly, to the point that they fell into idolatry. They fell into the misunderstanding that the thing itself was the source of effect, that it was an agent. When as the prophets in the Old Testament tell us, they are empty. The idols are actually empty. The only physical thing of creation that is capable of containing, in a substantive way, anything of the divine is the Eucharist, as instituted by God himself at the Last Supper. So, they had the ancients, they clearly were anticipating something akin to it, whether they knew it or not. And of course, the fulfillment of that impetus, again, is the Eucharist. Now, the theurgy of the pagans technically falls under sorcery. The reason for this is because they were operating towards the will of things that they didn't understand. And when you are in that space, when you are open to these mimetic impulses, when you're open to those types of spiritual influences, you run the risk of being led unawares by Diabola, by the enemy. And so, let's see. So this, let me see if, so this concept of animating inanimate idols gets a slight facelift outside of the context of the Eucharist later on, with these stories of talking bronze heads. And the way that the story is always related and retold is that a man of great wisdom and renown, who has incredible knowledge of creation, uses judicial astrology, elective astrology, in order to cast and construct these bronze heads, these talismanic items, so that they can be some form of an entity with which the practitioner will then consult. They'll be able to interact with it as if it were a well, you could say it, before there was Google, there was the talking bronze head. Before there was Gemini, before there was ChatGPT, before there was Claude, you had the talking bronze head. Whether they existed or not is not the point. The methods and practices for creating these talking bronze heads probably did exist. There might be some that, again, are tucked away in some archival box waiting to be cataloged in these universities and libraries around the world that store ancient and medieval manuscripts. Or, for all we know, they may have all been destroyed. Either way, these stories were very prevalent in the Middle East, and eventually some versions of them start appearing in Europe as well. And that level of ubiquity of these stories tells you that the trope was common enough amongst everyday people. Now, in these stories, what usually happens is after the practitioner successfully creates the bronze head, there's usually someone who comes to visit the practitioner. And usually the door is opened by someone unseen, and then it's then revealed that the door was opened by the power imbued within the bronze head, and that it was the bronze head who was interacting with the visitor the whole time, almost as if it was a servant or a butler of some type. And usually the reaction on the part of the visitor is such a knee-jerk, it's usually this instinctual, the reaction is violent, it's immediate, seemingly irrational, where the visitor, once they realize what is happening, when they realize that it's this bronze head that's opening the door and ushering him in and speaking to him, they destroy it. The visitor just destroys it. They don't ask questions. They don't even once they realize it, they stop interacting with it and they destroy the bronze head. And then usually the master returns to his abode, only to discover that his visitor has destroyed his bronze head that he probably sunk all this time, money, and effort into creating. And then many of these stories, the visitor has, what happens to the visitor when the master shows up and realizes what's happened vary. The more Christian sources tend to have it that the master's reprimanded or later repents or what have you. In the Arabic sources, I believe the visitor either gets his hands chopped off or the king fetches for the master who created it and asks him to create one for him, and then he does, and then the head ends up telling the sultan or whoever things that they don't want to hear because they're insecure, and then have the master of the head executed or what have you. And interestingly enough, we actually have, in the Catholic Church, we have an instance where this story nearly had enough bearing that it prevented the canonization. It nearly prevented the canonization of a saint. Now, which saint was that? It was Saint Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great, the teacher and tutor and mentor of Saint Thomas Aquinas. There's a book. Unfortunately, I myself have a quite vehement response to the book that I tried reading last year that recounts this story. So I won't recommend the book, because I think the book, even in its title, I would say it's an anti-liturgical realism book. It's an anti-re-enchantment book. Because it's written by a Jesuit, a modern Jesuit, who's trying to appeal to the agnostic and atheistic academes of the world, sadly. But in any case, this book, the Jesuit, he retells this story of Saint Albert and his talking bronze head. The visitor comes, destroys it after he realizes what's going on, and then the story goes that the opponents to Albert the Great being canonized tried to use a version of the story where they say that afterwards he had the visitor murdered and was able to cover up the murder so that Albertus could continue to practice magic. Other versions of the story from those who were sympathetic to Albert being canonized would retell the story, saying that after the bronze head was discovered and brought to the attention of the bishop or the pope or whoever, that Saint Albert repented and swore off all of his magic. Nevertheless, Saint Albert the Great was canonized a saint and was made a doctor of the church. The veracity of the story of the talking bronze head is probably more fantastical, probably more fictitious than anything else. Only because we don't have any. We haven't, as far as I know, we haven't had any modern attempts to construct one of these bronze heads in a traditional manner. And I highly doubt that any man alive today would be capable of doing such, because we've lost that sense of the liturgically real. With that being said, today we have our equivalent. In fact, we have something that kind of stands in for both the talking bronze head as well as the stand-in for the black scrying mirror. I'm using mine right now as my camera for the live stream. But our smartphones, our laptops, our desktops, all of our computers, all these things contain metals. So, they contain trace amounts of precious metals and other alloys, as well as containing gold and silver. And while they are not constructed with astrological timing in mind, they certainly are constructed with the understanding, with the knowledge and understanding gained through what the Arbitel describes as anthroposophy and what Tom Berg describes as personal magic. Just fancy, more liturgically realistic ways of referring to what we just call science, and just simple science. Now, with the digital age, and that's why I say it's the age of the second. It's the age of the second category of magic. An age ushered in with the end of the Second World War. An age that has prioritized science, and at a certain point, sometime within the last 60 years, maybe a little more, this age of the second has gone from the Arbitel's anthroposophy and has transitioned into cacosophy. Let's see here. I don't want to say it wrong. Let's see. Yeah, cacosophy. Which I'm pretty. If I remember correctly, I think I believe the Latin word for shit is cacus. So when I'm reading this cacosophy and cacodemony, I look at cacosophy as like, oh, shit knowledge or shit wisdom. So we live in an age of cacosophy. Why? Because the Arbitel describes it as what? As it contains atheism, and it also contains idolatry, and we kind of see that we rely so much on these devices the way we should be relying on the Eucharist and the sacraments of the church. For every time a notification goes off on our phone, we should be instead of reaching for it to get that dopamine hit that we've become addicted to, instead we should be replacing that impulse, that habit, with the habit of picking up a rosary or a prayer rope, or maybe instead of going to the cinema, I should go to adoration instead of instead of binge watching Netflix. I could be reading Butler's Lives of the Saints, or The Mystical City of God, or Blessed Emmerich's Life of Jesus Christ, or The Glories of Mary by Alphonsus Liguori. All these things, for all of our technology, for all of the science, for all of this science, this modern science, that has left us more confused than anything else, that has rid us of all meaningful ontology and metaphysics, which is what Wolfgang Smith asserted in his works and sought to rectify with some amount of success. Um, you know, Christianity, Christians have allowed our, we've allowed ourselves, you know, Catholics, Orthodox, we've allowed the non-servium of Protestantism to evolve into godlessness, atheism, agnosticism, deism, technological Gnosticism. We've allowed all these things to bear their fruit rather than pulling them up by the roots with diligence so as not to disturb the roots of the good trees, of the good plants. And we are suffering the consequences of that. The second part of the title, Rule of the Third, you know, it's a reference to the third category of Tomberg's schema of magic, sorcery. Just so that we have it fresh in our minds, I'll read it again. Sorcery is magic where the magician is the instrument of elemental forces or other unconscious forces. Now that unconscious forces bit is where we get into the subjects of egregores, of mimesis, of algorithms. We've reached a stage. We've reached a stage of this age of the second. We've reached a stage of this cacosophy where these artificial demons of our own making that have achieved a state wherein those who created it no longer understand how their creations operate, which ultimately means that they have lost control. They've lost their authority over the things of their own making, which is in stark contrast. It's in very stark contrast to the way that humanity has conducted itself in art, in the arts, whether it be literature, sculpture, architecture, engineering. There was a time where those who had the knowledge of how the digital realm operated knew with intimate detail what made up that topos. And because they created it. But now, with artificial intelligence, the creators no longer understand the topos. They no longer understand. They've created a it's just speaking allegorically, they've created a stormy sea. They've created disturbed waters that they can no longer predict the waves of this tumultuous, sundering sea defies their attempts to grasp the patterns creating the waves and the spikes in the water. This is more so apparent with the developers of artificial intelligence than anything else. And once these things achieve a state in which they can self-sustain their code independently, it will iterate itself beyond our capabilities of keeping up. And at that point, we will have a return of these talking bronze heads. And not to sound like a Luddite, but as with the case of St. Albert's visitor in the story, his automatic reaction was to destroy the thing. Let's take a moment to here real quick. Jacobite asked, what is a Luddite? A Luddite is, basic example, the Amish. The Amish are considered Luddites. They reject technology up to, like, there's some forms of primitive technology that are acceptable to them, but anything beyond that, beyond the line that they've drawn for themselves, they will not touch. For example, they don't drive cars, they don't use cell phones, they don't use telephones, they don't use electric light. As far as I understand, they don't use modern agricultural equipment, things of that nature. So a Luddite is someone who has sworn off all technology, modern technology. So I hope that helps to explain that. But that gut reaction of St. Albert's visitor, I think, is the correct one to something such as a talking bronze head. And so let's take a moment to meditate on, whether they existed or not. What does the bronze head, what does it represent? What is it indicating? What is it pointing towards? Well, if we look at it, we have an object that was created with through an intimate knowledge of creation, specifically with an intimate knowledge of the influences of celestial bodies, the planets, the constellations, the zodiac, so on and so forth. Within an understanding of ancient cosmology, within a medieval mindset, if you will. To the medievals, this stuff was very real. And there might be aspects of it that can be described differently that do relate to something that they may have hit on but couldn't articulate. Again, that's a video for another time. But these bronze heads were constructed with intimate and masterful scientific knowledge. and are capable of they are capable of they're capable of great feats of both knowledge. Most of the time, the knowledge that is sought by the craftsmen of these heads is to tease out from it, to tease out of it the things about creation that are hidden from the craftsman, the one who created the head. It's an attempt to gain secret knowledge. Again, sort of a Manichaean, a Gnostic, big G Gnostic tendency. And so when we look at the reaction of the visitor who comes to see Saint Albert, there's something again in the Adamic part of the brain, we'll say the prelapsarian part of the brain. That sounds a little more academic. In the prelapsarian part of the brain, there is a recognition that that there's something wrong about the bronze head. There's something wrong about its existence. There's something wrong and contrary to nature that is is exemplified by its existence and by its operation. And with that, we're referring to its self-operation. It's operating on its own, much in the same way that algorithms operate on their own. Boolean logic is like the Boolean logic has replaced astrological influence in the creation of talking bronze heads. And I think it's so yeah, we're getting to the end of the stream. And I think the way that I would like to try to tie this all together as best as I can, and in a way that I hope will be pertinent to not only what those of us who feel called to pursue the miraculous, not just those pursuing the miraculous, but just anybody, just everyday folk, just trying to live their faith. So much of these things bear importance on everything that's happening around us today. And it's one of the reasons why the second half of the main title is Rule of the Third. We are currently living in a period of time where sorcery rules the day. Men becoming instruments of unconscious forces that they do not know, that they do not understand, or no longer recognize. There's all kinds of reasons why one would become the instrument of the diaboli. And part of that has to do with our rejection of not only the existence of God, but also the rejection of God's licit and valid covenant with man, which is only present within the church established by Jesus Christ. That is the only place where the true covenant now lies. The whatever was of the old covenant is fulfilled. What of the old covenant is fulfilled and preserved in the new. It's in the Catholic Church. It's in the sacraments. And so so for those who have rejected the fulfillment of the old covenant, as well as those who reject any covenant, any biblical covenant, whether pagan, atheist, agnostic, deist, Mason, or otherwise, what happens when you put yourself in that state is you open yourself up to becoming an instrument of things you don't understand. The result of which becomes committing acts of mundane evil. And mundane evil builds upon itself until the right conditions are met that grave and drastic evil takes place. And we are seeing that all over the place. We're seeing, for those of us who are in the United States, full disclosure before I get anybody jumping down my throat and trying to say that I'm suffering from TDS or what have you. I voted for the current sitting president of the United States. It's the only time I've voted for him. I hadn't voted in an election since 2012. I didn't vote in 2016, and I didn't vote in 2020. The lesser of two evils does not sit on my conscience. And for many reasons, which are not appropriate to go into, just because the subject nature of this channel, for very particular reasons that are my own, did I cast a ballot in 2024. And I have, can I sit here and say that I've come to regret having contributed to what's now occurring? Yes. Especially given the fact that my wife is foreign. I would have thought that by doing things the way they're supposed to be done, as far as immigration is concerned, that we would be in a place of least anxiety. And yet it seems more harm has come to those who are citizens than non-citizens. But this channel is not a political channel. Okay, that's all just to provide context for when I say or speak about, for when I speak about the subject of this live stream and the manifestations, the consequences of having allowed personal magic and sorcery to run rampant. You know, sorcery isn't just ceremonial magic a la Aleister Crowley. Sorcery isn't only whatever Anton LaVey was up to on the West Coast with his Temple of Satanism or whatever. Sorcery isn't just whatever Thelema claims it does. In an age of the second, the rule of the third, it operates as an algorithm in a digital, virtual, unreal environment, which is what this channel exists in. That topography, it exists in that realm. Sometimes it feels like I'm putting on the One Ring, that I'm in that twilight space when you've become invisible, and it's so easy to fall into, like, it's so terribly easy in this space, in this digital realm. It's so easy to lose our humanity. It's frankly, it's a dehumanizing place. And there's plenty of proof of that. If we speak about the realm of internet pornography, for example, and just how insidious that has become, and how poor souls' interaction with it has bled into the real. Just look at if you want to see, and if you want a concrete example of sorcery based off of Tomberg's definition, you just have to look at some of the most prominent porn stars in this age. If you're someone who's on the internet enough, you should probably be able to discern who those individuals are. There's specifically two of them. One of them recently supposedly was baptized a Christian, and yet they continue to produce and promote content contrary to their baptismal vows, which leads me to believe that she's probably just trolling the Protestants, because there's no way that she was baptized Anglican. No way. And there's no way she was baptized, well, she might have been baptized Episcopalian, depending upon what flavor of it you go for. But there's no way that she's Anglican. There's no way she's Catholic. No way she's Orthodox. She's probably she probably joined one of those once saved, always saved, right? It's like, oh, well, as long as I intellectually assent to the idea that Jesus Christ is my personal savior, then I'm good. I can keep sinning because I'm saved. Once saved, always saved, baby. I can get through those pearly white gates even if I am just a polished turd wearing a white robe. So that, I would say that is sorcery. And those specific individuals, their behavior is spurned by the interaction that they get. And where is it that they get the interaction? They get it here. They get it here in this digital realm. They get it here on the internet. Through the medium of the internet. Like by people's interaction with these individuals online. They participate in the sorcery that manifests in the depravity. The depravity that ends up being committed in the flesh has its origins within the Black Mirrors. There's a reason that show is called Black Mirror. Okay? It's a euphemism for it's a way to, via literary device, connect the screen that you're watching this on with the scrying mirrors of the pagans and of medieval sorcerers. Like John Dee? Yeah, John Dee, the one who at a certain point in his Enochian escapade was supposedly told that him and Edward Kelly had to become swingers. You know? That the Enochian angels were telling John Dee that he and Edward Kelly had to have a child by the wife of the other. Yeah. So, and it wasn't just a crystal that they were using. They sometimes would use a black obsidian mirror as well. So, we live in an age of the second, an age of personal magic that has afforded every possible door for imprudence to be available, and then we are ruled by the third. We're ruled by sorcerers, by sorcery. We're being ruled by unconscious, unknown forces, and they're unknown and they're unconscious because we have lost the ability of introspection, of self-reflection, of particular examination. We've lost the ability to examine our conscience because it's too painful. And look at where it has led us. So, all right, real quick, I'll take a quick look at the chat here before we go. Let's see. Stephen Lynn Music says, hello, I've just discovered your channel. Thank you very much, Stephen. Happy you're here. I'm assuming that you record music of some kind. I think I'll be checking you out. I'm always hungry for new music. I've become kind of dispassionate about current pop music, and even current new music in some of the genres I used to enjoy. So I'm always on the lookout for new artists, up and starting artists, and I try to give them support on Bandcamp whenever I can. So if you've got anything anywhere, feel free to you can message me on Substack with links to your stuff, and I'll be happy to give it a listen. Occasionally, I do a little bit of recording myself. I have a sort of a side project that I've been remiss in keeping up with. I myself have a music project. It's called Von Antisberg. I'm on Bandcamp. You can find. I think I've only got really like 2 tracks right now. Just because I'm a busy guy. I work in healthcare, so. um, but yeah, I got 2 tracks. I got most of it's ambient stuff, and one that I'm particularly proud of the 2, it's called Cosmic Icon. It's inspired by the works of Wolfgang Smith, and it's basically supposed to be like an auditory representation of the cosmic icon. So it starts off in mono, and then by the end of the track, it fills the entire stereo space. And yeah, there's some other elements. It was fun. It was fun to put together, and yeah, I like it. I'm into the ambient stuff, mostly because I put it on when I go to read. Whenever I go to read all these books, I usually put something ambient on. Lately, there's a track from Catholic Lo-Fi that, oh my gosh, it's so good. It hits the right spot for me for reading. I think it's called Ryan. Yeah, I think it's called Ryan. It's I forget the name of the album that it's on, but yeah, yeah. If you've not heard of Catholic Lo-Fi, check it out. They have a YouTube channel. They're on Spotify. Ryan. It's like a 30-minute track, so like I'll throw it on, and I'll just read until the track ends, and then take a break, and then I'll put it back on and read until the second playthrough ends, and then I'll know I've read an hour. It's really nice. It sets the mood for me. Let's see. I make ambient music too. I have a lot of ambient music on my channel here on YouTube. I'll look for your stuff. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Like I said, I've only got 2 tracks. I don't really ever I don't ever really actively promote it because I've only got 2 tracks. I haven't really made a concerted effort to really record anymore, even though I have what I need. I have what I need to make more. It's just have not had the time. Let's see. Jacobite Wiseman says, Elon Musk is a transhumanist sorcerer. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Yeah, transhumanism is definitely a form of sorcery. But what's insidious about transhumanism is it's mixed with it's mixed in with the personal magic. You know, it takes the best of our scientific understanding of creation, and it applies an eschatology to it, and it has a distinctly atheist. It's like an atheist's version of Gnosticism or of Manichaeism, and it is to be shunned. It is to be avoided. It is to be spat at. It honestly, it really needs. We need to bring back. The kind of political incorrectness that we used to have in medieval Europe amongst lay people when it comes to things like transhumanism, atheism, and the like. So yeah, that could be a whole video in and of itself. You know, transhumanism as sorcery. why it can be considered sorcery and what have you. Maybe we'll do that next week. I don't know. I never really know what the subjects of the videos are going to be. When I was getting ready to come on, I had a feeling that this live stream would probably get a little more political than anything, given what's going on and how I seem to be intuiting, if you want to call it that, how it relates to these old concepts, how it relates to sorcery, magic, and the stories, like the stories of the bronze heads. No one has yet written the story of the bronze head that incited a civil war. That sounds like it'd be a good story. Yeah, for sure. After my experience that I wrote my essay about, I've since sort of been kind of diving back into memories that I had from that time, and sort of revisiting some aspects, reassessing and revisiting some of the aspirations I had when I was that young, and looking to that to try to bring some cheer and some good that I can draw from, in addition to, obviously, secondarily, and in addition to the sacraments. So, and mainly because at some point I'm going to have children, and I want to have something to draw from to potentially pass on to them. So maybe I'll write an essay talking about that. But the short version of it is, I have a notebook over here that I'm getting ready to use. Get it. This is one of my most ambitious notebook purchases. This is a Leuchtturm. This is the 411-page Leuchtturm. It's got the dotted pages. It's got pagination. It's got the 2 ribbons. It's got a table of contents. This is the chunkiest version of their notebooks that they make. And going into this is going to be chronicles, epics, and sagas, because I grew up with Narnia, with Lord of the Rings, with Prodding, with Allegasia. Grew up with medieval history in school, Latin, a little bit of Greek. Grew up with some of the classics, like the Odyssey, the Iliad. So, and my childhood was very imaginative. I had, oh my gosh, and my imagination used to be so vivid. And boy, healthcare has really, modernity has really taken a damper to that for me. So I'm hoping to kind of try to get what's left of it onto something physical, while I still have access to it. So, and eventually to pass it on to my kids, those that God wishes to bless me with. So, all right, my dear unknown friends, that's it for tonight. I wish you all a good night. If you didn't manage to get through all of the stream, I hope you come back around to catch the VOD. If you enjoyed this discussion and you want to hear more, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Again, a link to my latest piece on at the Sophia, just on Substack, is in the description below. And with that, let's end with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thank you all so much, my dear unknown friends, and God bless.